So Rachel, I want to know, and I want you to go far back as you can. When was the first time in your life that it actually hurt to hope? Because I love this title, and it just makes me think. I mean, this is such a rich thought. So, in your Wayback Machine, what comes to mind right now?
The very first thing that popped into my head was the day after Christmas as a kid, when you have just had the momentous day of opening presents, the thing you've been looking forward to, circling gifts and magazines you wanted, wrapping, cookies, everyone's there. And then the day after, you wake up and there's already this anticipation of something else that you're looking for, and there's an ache at the same time. I mean, as a kid, 5, 6, 7 years old, I remember this, of feeling like, okay, I just had this thing, and I'm already wanting something else, and there's an ache involved. And so I would say that was the earliest moment I can remember this thing that C.S. Lewis writes about called Sehnsucht, which is this German word which means the inconsolable longing for we know not what.
Yeah.
Even as a little kid, there's all of this mixture of the beauty and the ache of life, of having our expectations sometimes met, sometimes exceeded, often not. And just the reality that there's always going to be something else that we are hoping for.
Oh, it's so good. And that's the whole point of asking you that question going way back is when you write a book about this, it forces us as a reader to confront the reality that if we're going to truly live, then we're going to have to deal with this tension between unmet expectations. We're creatures of hope without even trying.
Right. Yeah.
And yet, if you look at where we are at in the world today, it feels as though we're more and more hopeless. Do you agree or disagree with that statement?
In my experience, I would say that the older I get, the more intentional and courageous an act it is to hope.
Yeah.
I think cynicism has a way of settling in. And it does feel like, in particular, some of the topics I tackle in the book, especially a lot of my friends navigating their 20s, their 30s as single people, I would say 100% hands down, there is a lot of hopelessness, and the data backs that up, of people who are opting out of pursuing committed relationships because of the pain that's involved in the way that we pursue romantic relationships today. So I would say 100% in certain areas, our culture is faced with a lot of hopelessness, maybe not just in relationships, but in, I think, the pressure of trying to balance it all, trying to balance all of the hopes that we have, right? The hope for family, the hope for a meaningful career path. It feels like there's a tremendous amount of pressure and a hopelessness that comes with that of trying to keep up and feeling like I can't.
Yeah. It seems ironic. I'm curious if you agree that in our attempt to avoid the hurt that comes with hope, we end up hurting more. It's actually, it hurts way more to try to be hopeless.
Yeah.
Because I don't know that you can actually tamp it down, can you?
That's such a good point. I don't think it's possible. I think you can ignore, you can stifle, you can bury, but it's not going anywhere.
Yeah.
It's going to go sideways. It's going to fester. It's going to lead you to a place of bitterness and even more hopelessness.
It's like the beach ball in the pool. You're trying to hold the beach ball down, and it's going to squirt out.
Exactly. And it's going to explode over here into an issue that you didn't realize you were dealing with. Yeah, 100%.
I love that. Okay, so let's get right into it. We asked about young Rachel post-Christmas. Take me to the point, I'm guessing, is the impetus of this book.
Yeah. So I was raised in a Christian home, very nurturing environment. However, my family did go to a side of the faith that was, like, I would say, and they would say as well, just uber conservative and like almost fundamentalist. And so growing up for a lot of my formative years, I didn't have a picture of what a woman could be, who a woman could be, other than a wife and mom.
Right.
And so that's one part of the story. The other part of the story is that I truly have always wanted those things.
Yeah.
I've always desired the role of being a wife and a mom. And I think that there are circles of our culture that don't honor and value the dignity and the work it takes to do those things. So young girl, had a great experience growing up, loved education, but really didn't have a vision for life beyond college. I just thought, I'm going to get married. I'm going to start having babies and I'll brew kombucha with them and like homeschool them and like kind of repeat the same cycle of like what I'd grown up with. And then, upon graduating college and realizing like, oh geez, like this is harder than I thought. And so I think that setting into those mid 20s, late 20s, turning into early 30s, a kind of hopelessness crept in of like, what am I doing? Like, what's the next milestone to hit if I am this thing that I long for, this desire to be married, keeps getting pushed down the road?
So what was going on? I'm just curious because I want people to know you to better understand what I think is a really powerful book to help people with this. What happened? I mean, you're not ugly. You're not weird. I'm just curious because I think this journey, by the way, the data, I wish I knew this data. It's not my expertise, but people are getting married later in life. Is that true?
Yes.
Okay, and so I feel like I'm noticing that. I got married at 23, and when I tell people in their 20s that I got married at 23, it freaks them out.
Yeah, totally.
You know, like, wow, what are you, nuts?
Yes.
And so with that being the context, I know you.
Yes.
You're not somebody who is like, ugh. Okay.
Yeah.
So what was going on? Multiple relationships. You just couldn't find the one.
Right. Exactly. So I was very, I started dating in high school, had my first serious relationship when I was like 17, dated for almost 2 years. Great relationship, great guy. One of the things I say about dating that I think people should aim to do, he left me better than he found me. Like that was a wonderful experience. But what was happening in that particular relationship is I was growing up. I went to college and I realized, I was literally having friends getting married at age 19, 20, 21,
you weren't
the young
thinking
marriage.
That, were you?
I was at first. And then I go to college and I'm like, oh my gosh, there's a lot out here.
A lot of
there's
dudes.
There's a lot of dudes. There's a lot of opportunity. There's a lot of, I want to go study abroad. I want to go, I've never really thought about work and what I'll do to make a living. And so we just kind of honestly just kind of drifted and realized like I wasn't ready to get married. And so I felt like after that relationship ended, I just went into a series of, early 20s, and I dated very consistently. Like I was not afraid to go out with people. I was not afraid to, accept invitations to be set up. A little bit later when apps came on the scene, I wasn't afraid to do apps. I didn't
did the dating apps.
Yes, I did. And it's tough. It's tough. It takes a lot of mental effort to stay plugged into them.
I'm sure.
And you can talk to anybody today that will tell you like, yeah, I'm on them, I'm texting, I'm messaging, I'm going out with this guy. And then it's like, ugh, I get to a point where I need to take a break because it's exhausting. It's draining. It takes a lot of time and effort. And it's a really pretty unnatural way to meet people.
Okay. So does it, because this is all after I got married. So does it increase your hope and dash your hope a little bit more because it's an app, or it's all, it seems like it's a little bit more, I have higher expectations than if I'm just kind of organically working through this. Is that true?
I think there is a bit of a roller coaster, like you're saying, of these quick hits of like, oh my gosh, look, this guy, he has these 5 data points that seem exciting to me. And then we start chatting. It's like, oh, this conversation is really boring. And then you meet another one. And so there's definitely more of a roller coaster because the algorithm is just feeding you more options. Is
it also a little bit more raw when you get rejected on that thing, or does that happen that way? I just don't know how that works.
Unfortunately, I think people sadly don't even do rejection very well these days, meaning that my experience often was like you get ghosted more often, which is a form of rejection, 100%. Right?
That's got to be awful.
But I would rather have somebody have the dignity of having a conversation saying, hey, it's been nice to get to know you, not interested, whatever.
Sure.
So it becomes, there certainly is rejection, but I found myself becoming kind of hard-hearted and cynical. And so then you start building up walls, and it really does, like that phrase, it hurts to hope because I don't want to put myself in a position again where I might get hurt.
Right.
So yeah, the apps are rough. Now, a lot of people meet on apps. I can think of a handful of friends that have great relationships, great marriages, but it does take a lot of work and a lot of effort to wade through it.
Okay. So that's not fun. So
not fun.
Your early 20s going through this, mid-20s?
Yeah, early mid-20s. I dated pretty consistently. I really was, it wasn't until, truly after that very first relationship where I dated this guy almost 2 years, I had some, I would say, significant relationships, but not many long-term relationships.
So does that hurt?
Oh yeah. Looking.
Well, what are you experiencing as you go through these and they're just not the one?
I tend to be. So I talk about in the book, there's one chapter where I talk about a spectrum of how we
Yes,
tend
I
to
love
deal.
this. Break this down. This
yeah,
is really helpful.
totally. So there's a spectrum of how we tend to respond to disappointment. And this is not based in science. It's just kind of a helpful
Sure.
framework to think of ourselves and how our personalities are wired. So on one end, you've got the fragile response, which is the person who gets hurt, gets rejected, doesn't get asked on a third date or whatever they were hoping for, and they go into problem-solving mode. They go into frantic action-oriented mode. Like, I will do whatever it takes to fix this situation. So that might look like, you're feverishly on apps again, or maybe you go out with someone that you are compromising your standards on, but you just rather be with someone, right? So it can lead to kind of obsessiveness, anxiety, the inability to just slow down and to be like, I'm okay.
Yeah.
And this thing that I want doesn't define me, and it doesn't have to drive me. So that's that's the fragile end.
Right.
On the other end of the spectrum, we have the frozen response, which is the coping mechanism of this hurts, so I'm going to shut down. That's what we we're talking about earlier. It's pushing the beach ball under the water and trying to hold it there. It's saying, I'm just going to go lock this thing in the deep freezer and forget about it, try to forget about it. I'm going to become bitter. I'm going to become cold. I'm going to become extremely independent. And so for me, now we all do both of these things, right? Depending on the situation, depending on our past hurts. In general, personality-wise and because of our formation, we tend to gravitate towards one of them. So I found myself on that fragile end where I would get my hopes up and I would be excited. Maybe this is it. Maybe this will be the one. It'll work out. Get him dashed. And it wouldn't take me too long to kind of pick myself back up and get back out there. I know that's not the case for some people. Some people get stuck in that frozen end. Right. And I'm not saying one is healthier than the other. Both are unhealthy coping mechanisms for how we deal with the pain of unmet longing, of disappointment.
Wow. So take us to your journey. So this is happening. You're bouncing back, but I'm guessing the fragility kind of stacks.
Absolutely.
And so each time it doesn't work out, I'm guessing.
Yep.
It hurts a little bit more.
Yep. I got to the point for me nearing my 30th birthday, which functions as like a temporal landmark, like this big thing on the horizon that means something significant. Like by 30, I thought my life would look like XYZ, right?
100%.
I thought I'd be married, thought maybe I have 1 or 2 kids, thought I'd have a little bit more of my career figured out by now. And I think most people can feel that about any phase of life, right? It almost always, I think it's more true that we experience that disappointment and life doesn't look like I thought it would. Now, for me, turning 30 was the time marker as well for the biological reality of wanting to have kids too.
Yeah, you're feeling like I'm behind.
Exactly. So that starts to feel heavier. When I ask people, like when I've done interviews and talk to people about this concept in my own experience, I ask, what does unmet longing feel like? And I often hear it feels heavy. It just feels like this weight. And it began to weigh heavier and heavier.
What
and
were
so,
some of the thoughts?
Oh,
or shall
all right,
I
we're
say
gonna go
voices?
there. Yeah.
Well, to the extent that you want to.
Totally.
But I'm just curious what the voices were. Here you are approaching 30.
Yep.
And the wife and mom thing is starting to feel elusive, if not already been feeling elusive.
Yeah.
What are you feeling? What are you fighting? Voices, thoughts?
One of those is just, the question, that sinister voice whispering, like, what's wrong with you? Like, no, why has no one picked you? That voice of
lovable?
Shame. Yeah. Am I lovable? Am I enough?
Wow.
Will you ever have fill in the blank? Like, are you running out of time? If I never find a partner, if I never am able to have kids, create a family of my own, what will life look like in 30 years? You start to project. Yeah, what's Thanksgiving going to look like? What's it going to look like on my, on my deathbed? Who will be there with me? I mean, these are deep connections that play out through every facet of our life. What
level of loneliness would you say you were experiencing?
Yeah.
Because you're a social person, active. So I'm curious what you're dealing with in the relationship side of things versus the friendship.
Right. Yeah, the loneliness is interesting because I'm very blessed with amazing friends, amazing family support. My poor mom took a lot of phone calls in
I'll
this
bet.
time of my life where I'm just like literally crying on the phone with her. Great friends. I mean, friends who would just sit with me in the middle of my workday and grab my hand and like
Oh,
pray with me and cry with me. Like,
wow.
so yes, I mean, I was surrounded by amazing community. And at the same time, there begins this like kind of gap of like, well, here are my single friends who are
Yeah.
doing life the way I'm doing life. And then when you are with friends in a different phase and they're talking about potty training, they're talking about where they're sending their kids to school, and you begin to isolate even in the same room with people, and that loneliness can set in. Yeah, and I want to say something too. For a lot of people, context is so important to all of these desires and hopes and expectations we have, right? You know, we talked about you got married young. I came from that background as well. There may be people listening who they're not even thinking about getting married until they're 30,
Yeah,
right?
that's right.
And just because of their cultural context, or they may not be thinking about marriage at all. They might have written it off
Yeah.
entirely. And so much of that context and the circles we're in, whether that's our work, our faith communities, our friend communities, play into the expectations that shape what we think our life will look like, or what we hope it will, what
Yeah.
it will be like.
So, your mom,
She's a saint.
you called her a million times. She's your mom, but she's also a godly lady. I'm curious, some of the anchors or things that she would say beyond prayer and that support. What are some things you learned maybe from her or other friends in this time that we now can see reflected in your journey and in this book?
Yeah.
What'd you cling to?
Wow. So just, I mean, encouragement and perspective that we often amplify whenever we're suffering and feeling weighed down by something. Of course, it feels much bigger than it actually is a lot of the time. You know, I might feel like time is running out, but it's actually not. So I think my mom and good friends like her would help me kind of grasp the facts of like, get the facts of your situation. Don't allow your feelings to write the narrative. So reminding me things like, hey, you are still young. You don't feel like it all the time, but you are. There is time. Reminding me the facts about God's character and who he is and the promises of scripture to cling to. My mom was the one that challenged me to write the book. I was on my way to a first date of this guy I met on Hinge, and I called her and I'm just like whining. And she said, like, why don't you write about this stuff?
Yeah.
And I was like, listen, I have nothing good to say about it. Like, why would I write about it? But I took her challenge to heart, and that's eventually what led to the book that we have sitting in front of us. And so she challenged me to make something productive out of that time and not just allow it to overpower me and kind of dictate who I was becoming and like where I was going.
Yeah. I want to dive in on this timeline. So let's dive in on it right now. Actually, we're going to get ahead in the story and come back.
Okay.
Okay. What's fascinating about this is your response is, Mom, I don't have much to say. And what I have to say is not going to help anybody because it's just, I'm angry, I'm hurt, whatever, all the things. And I'm just curious, the timeline between when you started writing this book and when you meet Jeff, who becomes your husband. What was the timeline for our listener and our viewer?
So what's funny is I moved to Nashville here where you and I met and had the privilege of getting to know each other. I moved here in 2019. The day after I started my job, I met the man who had now become my husband.
Right.
I just didn't see him as that yet.
Yeah.
So fall of 2019, we actually met. We were friends for about a year. I started writing the book in the summer of 2020.
Okay.
So COVID shuts the world down, which has obviously its own challenges. It was hard to turn 30 that summer. You know, there was a lot going on.
So true.
So I start writing that summer, and honestly, just 3-4 months later is when
First date?
Well,
because you guys knew each other.
We knew each other.
Yeah.
We were very good friends. He was dating somebody, so that's one of the reasons why he was like in the friend zone for me. We worked together. There's all these number of reasons, but then God started to change. Honestly, I started to have feelings for him that kind of felt like they came out of nowhere. I was like, who is this guy?
You had feelings for him before before you guys before he showed interest.
So I kind of felt like there was some interest there. Like I got hints of like, okay, I think this guy.
Okay, yeah, he
but
was
we
walking
hadn't-
around the surface.
Exactly.
He was circling.
testing the waters a little bit. Yeah.
But yet he's dating somebody else.
Yes, yeah.
Right.
So there was just kind of like our friends, our coworkers would say things like, "Hey, you guys seem to have like chemistry. Basically, there seems to be something there." But there was never anything. We never went out. We never even saw each other outside of work. We just were friends at the office. So the key was he asked me to be in a band with him. We do this big company battle of the bands thing, and the music was one of the things that won me over.
Sure.
But I saw him, I mean, it was spending time with him. It was seeing him in a context of leadership and of like the way he treated people. Yeah. And it was kind of this light bulb went off. I was like, Jeff Miller is he's a good
dude.
man. Yeah. He's amazing.
And so the timeline though, so you start writing in summer of 2020.
Yep.
First date is
October. Yeah. So
okay, so that's not coincidence.
No, it's not at all. I feel like.
What do you see now?
Yeah,
you look back on it.
Looking back, I see such kindness in the Lord to bring me to a place where he's like, I'm going to lead you to a place where you feel like it's not going to get any better than this. Yeah. And just wait, watch. It's going to get better.
Was it really rough and dark?
Yeah, I mean,
before Jeff, I mean, I'm just curious.
Yeah, I mean, there were definitely. I was at a place of, for me, mental health challenges have always been kind of compact and seasonal. But I was in a tough spot at that moment of just like, I feel like when I look at my life, it felt like this kind of gray abyss. Just like there was no anchor. There was like, what's the direction? Where do I belong?
Right.
You know, and so God brought me to this place where it's like. He had to ask me a couple questions. I wrote about one of these experiences in the book where I had this horrible panic attack, and I was just terrified about the choices I was making, the direction I was heading, and the loneliness I was experiencing. Once again, my parents, who are just amazing support for me, they show up in that moment of that panic attack, and my dad posed a question to me. He was like, "What are you afraid of?" And I just started to list all of that. Some of the things we've talked about already, like what's wrong with me? Will anyone ever pick me? Right. Am I lovable? Where do I belong? And you know, that manifests in all these things that I wanted to have happen in my life. And my dad just said, he's like, if these fears play out for you, like if you don't get married, or at least you don't get married for a while, you know, is God still good? And that was a deeply rock bottom moment. And I'm, you know, looking back with the timing, like you're saying, like I see God's kindness to me to lead me to that spot to test my faith in a way that I never would have had to if I hadn't walked through something difficult.
Did you make a decision? Did you wrestle with your dad's question?
Yeah.
And before Jeff shows up, I'm just curious of how God works, because I just, in my own life and in other people's life, I've just seen him step in those moments where it just feels like there's zero chance he's going to. It feels like this was going on for you. Yeah. Oh. So did you reconcile that question?
Yeah. I mean, I didn't have an answer for him in the moment. It was so deep.
No.
Right. Yeah. But it rattled me and it challenged me. And I would say that faith for me has always been in my 20s and my 30s. As the older I get, the more I see, like, I cannot not believe. It's kind of like when Peter says to Jesus, like, where else would we go? Like, you alone have the words of eternal life. And so no matter how hard it's gotten or how many doubts I've had, it has been a moment of choice. Like, faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things unseen, to say, I choose to trust you, even though I don't see. Right. I choose to believe that you're good, even though I don't feel that way. So absolutely, it's become a choice that's been backed up by God saying, all right, I'm going to move. Right. Like, you're going to see my faithfulness. Right. Not all suffering makes sense on this side of eternity, but I'm grateful that in my story, I am grateful. I have a level of depth and trust in God and seeing his kindness to me that I wouldn't have had if I hadn't gone through that.
Yeah. I would love for you to share with us the emotions that you felt, or the conversations, or the shouting matches, or the sob fest. I don't know.
Absolutely.
What was the worst of it?
I have a chapter in the book called A Holy Ugly Cry, and it's about the power of lament. It's the power of practicing prayer no matter what's inside your heart, Lamentations 2:19 says, pour out your heart like water in the presence of the Lord. So just picturing like a glass and just dumping it over. Whatever's in it, just let it come out before him. And so there were many moments like that. For me, because I started writing the book the summer of 2020, working from home, life was shut down, everything was on pause. There was a lot of just cry walks, which was kind of fortunate because people were keeping their distance. They're like, I don't want you to, I don't want to get sick, but also what are you doing? So,
because you're snotting and it wasn't because of COVID.
Exactly.
It was your heart breaking.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah. Wow.
So a lot of that, and a lot of, so definitely heartache, like truly heartache. That's physically the way it would show up in my body for me was just like a true aching, that heaviness we talked about earlier, the heartache.
Were you ever angry?
Oh, yeah. Angry. It's funny. If you look at the Enneagram framework, I'm an Enneagram 9.
Explain that for people.
Yes, for people who don't know, it's a personality type that is like what's known as a peacemaker. And unfortunately, 9s are not in touch with their anger, which is not a healthy thing. And so I know that when I feel anger, it's like, that's deep. And I needed to access that and feel that way. But yeah, just kind of like the anger, I think, stemmed in one way from bad theology. And what I mean by that is I had been living unknowingly a relationship prosperity gospel mindset of like, and you and I have had conversations like this before. It's like, God, I did it right. Yeah. Like I did what you said, like as best I know how. I followed your rules. I did all this stuff. Why are you punishing me? And so, which is a very simplistic way to just reduce like this faith journey that we're on to a set of a checklist, and it's not that way. Right. So yeah, anger I think came from that, as like, God, I don't know what else to do. And I think another emotion that was very dangerous that I would feel bubbling up was just kind of resentment towards people that had like gotten what they wanted, and comparison of why am I not living that life. At times resentment towards men, starting to believe these terrible narratives about like there's no good guys, there's blah blah blah. And I think that exists in large part right now in my generation between both men and women. Just a lot of hurt that we can easily turn into a story that we tell ourselves about somebody else or another group of people.
So what did the scriptures teach you in this time? Because I know you, and so I wanted everybody to hear those emotions so that they realize it's okay for this to be really ugly and awkward. Because I mean, it's in the title.
Yeah.
It really does hurt to put your trust in God.
Yeah.
I mean, if you look at the scripture in Isaiah, those who wait on the Lord, in some translations, in others, it's those who hope in the Lord.
Right.
What were there people in the Bible that you got in touch with? You're like, okay, I see myself in her. Or was there certain scriptures that kept you in the game, kept you actively hoping?
Yeah. Yes. Oh my goodness. One immediately that comes to mind is Hannah in the Old Testament, who had been, just desperately longing to get pregnant. She was, with all the terrible things we have to deal with in our dating scene today, at least we're not dealing with polygamy like she or most of us. She was a sister wife, and the woman that she was married to, or I'm sorry, that her husband was also married to, was able to have tons of kids, and she was over here like unable to. So it's like I know, right? Like how just horrific. And so she goes to the temple, basically she goes to church one day, and Eli the priest is there, and he's watching her just having one of these holy ugly cries, and she's just pouring her heart out to God. And Eli comes over, and he thinks that she's drunk. He's like, she's such a mess. He's like, woman, why are you drinking? It's like 9 a.m. or something. And so God is so gracious to her. He hears her prayer, and she says, God, if you give me a son, I will dedicate him to you. I will give him back, and I will allow him to be in your house and serving you. And that's what God does. He listens. He is truly actually moved by her prayer, and he grants her the desire of her heart. And Samuel, her son, becomes one of the like greatest prophets in Israel's history. So stories like that, stories like, another one I loved is, and I write about it quite a bit in the book, is from John chapter 4 and Jesus' conversation with the woman at the well. I think most of my life reading that story, and coming from the background I came from, it felt like, Jesus was kind of like a little bit of when he tells her, hey, go call your husband. I want to continue this conversation with him. She says, I don't have a husband. And he goes, that's right. Like, you've been married 5 times, and the man you're with now is not your husband. And I think when I had read that before, it felt a little bit like Jesus, like, slap on the wrist, like, you're naughty, like, you've been, promiscuous. But the more I dug into it, gosh, just so much beauty, so much richness about Jesus seeking this woman out and actually having the dignity to have a conversation with her, treating her like an equal.
Yeah.
And at the end of the conversation, he even tells her something, she did get to this point where she asks, or she says, when the Messiah comes, he'll teach us everything we need to know. And he tells her, I'm he. And what's cool is up until that point in the book of John, Jesus has said this to no one.
Right.
She's the first person he trusts this information with. And so the more I study that scripture, which really is a conversation it's about worship. It's about, Jesus talks about living water being this source of life for us. And it's really about this problem of unmet longing, of like going back to the well over and over to draw water, and how weary that makes us as human beings. And he shows up and he tells her, I've got something better for you. So absolutely, I think scripture, and I write about this in the book too. It's like, we have to be students of scripture to know what is a promise of God and what's a nice to have in this life, but not a guarantee, right? And so we have to be anchored in the word if we want to stay grounded and stay connected to the Lord.
Yeah. Okay, so we're going to get real. We're going to get real for a lot of people who I hope are giving this conversation and ultimately the book a chance to meet them where they are in this unmet longing, as you really eloquently share, and it's hurting really bad. They're hurting right now.
Yeah.
They believe in God. Maybe they don't.
Right.
They have a legitimate relationship, or they're just kind of wishy-washy in and out. No judgment here, but I'm listing all these different people because I don't care how strong you say you are in your faith and how close you think you are with God. There are times we really doubt him. And this is the whole concept of faith. So with that being our context here, let's get gritty if we can. Did God answer your prayers?
Yes, he did. Now, and I will say, marriage is a precious and wonderful gift. I think that sometimes one of the narratives that we get is that, like, well, I got what I want, but it's still not perfect. And like, that's true. There's challenges with anything, with any good thing we have in life. But I think because he answered my prayers in a timeline that I would not have preferred, there's beauty that comes with the waiting and with the questioning and with the faithfulness of saying, I will choose to walk with you. Even. And
that's what happened with you. I love that.
Yeah.
So yes, he answered your prayer, just not in the timeline that you wanted.
Exactly.
And I said this the other night. We were in a Bible study together, and several couples, and I said that I've learned in my own journey that God's timing really sucks, but it's always right. And boy, I'm no theology scholar here, but I think that's really true. And that's what I wanted people to hear. But he didn't answer it when you wanted and how.
Right. Yeah.
But he did answer it.
Yeah. And thank God that he didn't answer prayers, say previous relationships that I'd been in, that I had been praying, God, I pray this is it. This is it. He's the one, Thank God he didn't answer that prayer.
Yeah.
So we can only make sense of the story in context, right? In perspective, and being able to zoom out and to kind of put some pieces together.
Do you think that now, based on your experience, that when God is withholding, he is protecting?
I would say...
Or is he perfecting?
Right.
Or is it both?
Yeah, absolutely. Those are both beautiful
ways to look at it.
In other words,
I guess, what did God do in you in this... by the way, the time span was what? So let's say post-college to the day you get engaged. We'll count that. How many years?
13,
13
14
years of longing to be a wife.
Yep.
Okay. So what's God doing in the withholding? Or what did he do with you during the season of withholding?
Yeah. Gosh, man, so many things. The depth of trust. There's disappointment and frustration I'm walking through even right now. And, we always have some unmet longing we're dealing with. And I think the way I'm responding earlier is because of what I've already learned, is to say, I've seen your faithfulness. I trust you. That's one, a deeper faith. Another thing is emotional wellness, like learning how to deal with everything I was feeling, not just from a theological, mental perspective, but from a physical, emotional perspective as well, saying, I need to learn skills about how to process unpleasant emotions and how to choose hope that will apply for the rest of my life. I think another thing is now having the gift of empathy for people. My heart, like I'm so sensitive to people who are single and who don't want to be single.
Right.
And that's a thing that I get to speak to now, and it's been a joy to speak to. So I think some relational skills that come along with that I wouldn't have learned if I'd never walked through that. That's a number of things. Also, I will say, we all have a choice to make, and speaking specifically to people who are single, if you do have a longer than usual timeline, or longer than you would like timeline, if it's 5 years, 10 years, maybe a couple decades, what are you doing with the time? Like, who are you becoming in the process? And I'm grateful that I was able to make good use of that time, to invest in work, to travel, to do some ministry things. I'm grateful that my husband made good use of those years for him as well. We were both in therapy. Like, we were both working to become the kind of person we wanted to be with. Yeah. And so I'm grateful for that. Like, I also have some beautiful, rich experiences, things I probably wouldn't have done if I had gotten married right after college and started popping out babies,
Right, exactly. Well, so again, I want you to speak to God's providence. I'm going to kind of give you a runway to go wherever you think, and I'd love for you to be the girlfriend in the platonic sense for guys and gals that are listening to this, because you've walked through this and you've written a book about it. As you look now, and I know Jeff's story, and I think the audience should know, there's a guy that was engaged. Yeah. And we're talking like essentially left at the altar. It's pretty darn close. Yep. Okay. And so, and he's a little bit older, not too much older, but a little bit older, but there's his journey. And you're over here doing this, and Jeff's over here doing this. And then you guys meet together at work. I mean, is there any denying God's hand in this?
It's wild. It is wild.
Now, the timing, you probably still need some answers one day, right?
Right.
Because there's a whole lot of pain there.
Yes. Yeah.
But at the same time, Jeff's your guy.
Yeah. 100%.
And you're Jeff's girl. And that's got to be, it's got to be really reassuring.
Yeah. I mean, it's unbelievable to me how many, like, God is the best storyteller. He's the best author, and just so many threads woven together of his interests, my interests, his beliefs, my beliefs, the vision for like who we want to be in the world and the family that we'll have. And I think the advantage of entering marriage, there are advantages to getting married later if you choose to make good use of the time. It's like, I believe way more realistic expectations of what I can get from him or what he can get from me than I would have had 10 years ago. And so we've already kind of like maybe skipped over a few lessons that we would have had to learn, if we had gotten married younger. But no, I see God's faithfulness and kindness in so many ways, like all of these beautiful, like, things that most people call coincidences that are just, to me, artistry of like the story that God is writing. The way, his journey to Nashville, my journey to Nashville, the fact that we sat like 6 feet apart, our desks were like literally right next to each other. Right. Yeah, so many beautiful things.
Like, looking back on it now, it's almost wild.
It is, yeah.
Like, it's absolutely spooky.
Yeah. And like you said, with his broken engagement and the heartache he went through, we all are at points in our lives where we think, this is the thing I want, this is the thing I need, if only I'll get this. And then we are so limited in our understanding and our scope. And then the worst thing possible happens. You don't get that. And it's only later that you can have the perspective to see, oh no, that was, once again, God's protection, God's provision, saying, I've got something different for you. Yeah. So I could and I did. I wrote a book about it. But I could write a
Yeah.
whole nother book about the beauty and the kindness that God has shown in my life through Jeff, through the gift of marriage, and the pros. There's loss as well, but the benefits of getting married later, have become so clear to me as well.
I don't want to make this question too practical. It's going to sound practical, but it's spiritual in its nature. To the person who's in a really tough spot and they're hurting right now, and they're hearing you, they're seeing you. What would you tell us? What would you tell me about hoping? Is there a way to hope? What's the healthy way to hope?
Yeah. So earlier we talked about the frozen and the fragile alternatives.
Being both unhealthy.
Right.
There's
both
gotta
unhealthy.
be something there. What have you learned?
That thing in the middle, I always come back to in my writing, in my life, and the interviews I've done is faith. It is choosing, and it really is. It's sometimes a daily, sometimes an hourly choice to say, I have a choice to make. I can choose hopelessness or I can choose hope. And hope is a grounded assurance. The biblical sense of hope is like that hope is placed in a person and not in a wishful thinking outcome. So it's kind of like, in Star Wars episode, I don't know which one, the very original one that came out when Princess Leia sends R2-D2 with a little hologram, and she projects it for Obi-Wan Kenobi, and she says, "Help me, Obi-Wan, you are my only hope."
Right.
Hope in the biblical sense is placed in the person of Jesus, in God, in his presence that says, no matter what happens, my hope is in you. Romans 15:13 says that may God, the source of all hope, fill you with hope as you rejoice in him. May you abound in hope. So hope is a choice that we can, it's an attribute that we can cultivate. And it's actually quite courageous. It's not Pollyanna. It's not naive. In fact, it's very, very difficult to choose hope. And now, at the same time, we live in an uncertain world. We live in a broken world. We live in a world full of suffering. So while your specific hope, maybe it's for a partner, maybe it's you're struggling to get pregnant, maybe it's a career dream you have, maybe you're dealing with a diagnosis that's just killing you, you're so sick. All of these specific hopes are not guarantees in this life. And that's where it gets tricky, right? Yeah. It's like I can place my ultimate hope in the character of God and his promise to never leave me and to never forsake me. And I argue in the book, we should still choose to hope for his good gifts as well.
Right.
Because like we said earlier, it's not going anywhere. One of my friends I interviewed who's struggled with some chronic illness that led her to still to this day is not able to get pregnant, which is just heartbreaking. She said, the reality is I will never not want kids. Like it's always going to be there.
Right.
So
that's the tension between the emotional and the spiritual.
Absolutely. And I'm so glad you said the word tension, because unmet longing is a tension to live with. Yeah. It's not a problem to solve.
Right.
And you might get the thing and it will come with burden. It will come with complications. It will come with blessing. And then our hearts are on to the next thing.
Right.
It's the reality of our human existence.
Right.
And it's the tether. What I argue in the book is that our deepest disappointments can become some of the most intimate connections with God if we allow them to be. If we allow, take it to him and say, I don't get it. I'm hurting. I'm angry. I'm sad. And I want to stay close to you in this. And I want to trust you in it.
Well, let's talk about where you are now. So you and Jeff been married just over a year.
2 years.
2 years, sorry.
Yeah, time flies.
Jeez, has it been 2
Yeah,
years?
isn't that crazy?
Oh, thank God you can edit that out. But okay, so here you sit, and you touched on this a little earlier. Your little foreshadowing. We have to go there. Your eyes and your heart, your prayers, your longings are to be a mama.
Yes.
And everybody understands that. And again, without getting into your timeline and too much into your business, how are you dealing with that longing? And in light of what you've learned and what you've written about, and my gosh, 13 years, and then God says, okay, now I found your man,
right?
Or whatever,
yeah.
And now here we go,
yeah.
We're on the next journey,
yes.
And by the way, I mean, I asked this from a place of experience, but as a guy, but my wife and I 7 years of infertility, and that's a real roller coaster.
Yeah.
Not projecting that on you.
Sure.
You're
Yeah.
not there.
Yeah.
But here you are.
Yeah.
At some point, you want to have a family.
Mm-hmm.
How will what you've learned in your journey to marriage
Yeah.
and in writing this book inform any
Mm-hmm.
disappointment or
Yeah.
any longing that's not met there?
Yeah, that's wonderful. So a couple of things, like that kind of gut level reaction of trust that I want to have in the Lord in every area of life. It's easier to access now when you've been through it, when you've been through the difficulty and you've walked with him. And so I will say, having, we are wanting to start a family, and it's taking, not at the point where we're like alarmed or anything, but it's taking longer than we thought. And so kind of at the point where you're like, it's kind of creeping in where you're like, okay, like, is this going to be a thing or not? And that sinking suspicion of like,
do you have a little, am I about to go, here we go again?
Yes. And in fact, I know this is not how God works, but it's like, oh gosh, since I wrote this book, is it going to be, is it like, you're going to live the journey through every phase? So I'm at that point of like, kind of on the precipice of like, all right, how am I going to respond? Am I going to choose hope?
Yeah.
So I think that having learned these lessons, it's easier to apply round 2. And I don't know what that will be if this continues, if that's going to be I don't know what it will be like in 6 months, a year, 5 years. I don't know. Right. The challenges will increase, right, with time. There's also an element, one of the important lessons that I write about is the habit of practicing grief. Because there's a reality being, I'm in my mid-30s, Jeff is a very young, spry 41. But there's a reality of like, I came from a big family. I'm one of 7 kids. And growing up, I always thought I would have a big family. Like maybe not 7, but like I was like 4, 5,
Right.
And, all things are possible. Still could be in the cards for us. But there's a bit of a grief to say, you know what, I may not have as many kids as I thought I would.
Yeah.
Or I'm going to grieve the fact that I don't have energy like I did in my 20s. There's
True.
the reality of like, this is where we are today. This is what we're dealing with. There's the grief of what is no longer possible. And there's the hope of what could be possible. And that window of uncertainty, it's really hard. It's really scary to sit in that. Yeah. And so, the desire to become a mom, even though it might just be, and for anybody who's in the same boat, maybe you've been trying for, it feels like a little bit, it feels like, we kind of rationalize, I shouldn't be getting sad or upset. I don't have nothing, other people have been through worse. And well, the reality is it's not just the amount of time you've been trying, it's the years previous to that. It's a lifetime potentially of hope that is all coming down on you in that moment as you're going month to month and saying, is it this month? No. Is it this month? No. So I'm walking through it in real time. And when I wrote the book, I wrote about the desire to have children from the place of a single person who had not yet found their life partner. It's very different once you're in it. And there's all these other layers of complication, like what's going on with my body and
Well, listen, I think there are probably a lot of parents that need to read this book who have hope for a kid. And it's just, they don't see an end to it. And it's like, okay, I'm trusting, I'm praying, I'm believing. And to that end, I want to ask you something. I'm curious what your take is on this. Because I think this is kind of, it's wrapped in faith, but I think there has to be some psychological or emotional discipline. All right. So tell me if you think this makes any sense. And I don't mind if you disagree and give us the real thing here. But I feel like in my own life that a part of my faith growing in areas where I need it, where I'm hoping, where I'm longing and something has been unmet, that the more I am aware of what I cannot control.
Yep.
So it's like a practical, I can't control this. I can't control this. I can't control this. But God is in control of it all.
Right. Yeah.
And when I get to that place, and it's almost like a grounding experience where I have to remind myself, quiet time and kind of just focus on that, I find that my faith, which is to me is the same as hope, I see that my faith and hope get stronger as a result of me focusing on how little control I actually have. Is that misguided? Does that square?
There's such a beautiful peace. I can feel it even as you're saying that comes in that surrender to say,
It's like,
Yeah. What else can I do?
I'm worried about something that
Yeah.
I have zilch
Yeah.
control over.
Absolutely. I think that tension between our responsibility as human beings and God's sovereignty is such a weird tension to manage. And some of us tend to over index on, I can do it, clinging to trying this false sense of control. And some over index on, well, God, God will bring me it whenever he's ready. Like, no, it's both and. So I think what you're saying, that practice, whether it's a daily check-in through prayer, through journaling, through self-coaching, to say what is in my control is a wonderful way to blend, to practically get our faith working, in the everyday world. Yeah, I think that's a fantastic way to look at it. I think that you're spot on there.
What have you learned about bouncing back? Do you have the spiritual hack? A couple of tips, because I love how you said I would bounce back, and I just wanted to make a note of that when you said it earlier in our conversation, because I think that's what this book does a lot of, helping you. But just what is that? Because we've got some people listening to this and watching this, whoever you are, wherever you are, or however you're watching. How do we take that promise of God's providence and bounce back? Is there something you did?
Yeah, I think a lot of it was friendship for me, of people who would help pick me up. Yeah. I tell a story in the book about super nerd moment here, but I love the Lord of the Rings trilogy. Yep. One of the, just epic, amazing writing. I love the moment when Frodo, who's this ring bearer who has this horribly difficult thing to accomplish that no one else can do but him, and it's starting to weigh on him. He is beat. He is almost out of gas, and they're very close to finishing. They just have to walk up this mountain. And Sam, his best friend, his companion, who's been with him this whole time, Frodo's just laid out. He just can't go another step. And Sam says to him, I can't carry it for you, but I can carry you. And we all need that. We need that in our friendships. And that's where that loneliness, like we talked about earlier, just makes it so twisted and dark when we don't have those people to pick us up, to get us off the ground, say, I'm going to carry you for a little bit, because you can't carry yourself. That's one of those things. I would say another thing is, like, I just would be blessed, and specifically in the realm of like dating and the desire to be married, I would look at people that had marriages that I loved, and that instilled in me the belief that it's possible. Yeah. Like it's possible.
Oh yeah, it's there.
It's there. Yeah. So just the reality of like being with people who keep you grounded, who keep you bouncing back, and of course I think the more tightly we cling to the negative emotions, to the hurt, to the anger, the sadness, the sooner we're ready to release it and let go, the sooner we can move on.
I love that.
And bounce back. So you have to practice that.
I love that. I want to stay in the friend section. By the way, there's a bonus chapter in how to be a friend with someone who's dealing with unmet longing. It's really fantastic. And so to that end, let's have some fun here. What should we, as friends, who are walking through life with someone who's really in a valley of unmet longing, what do we not say?
Oh, man.
And what do we do?
Yeah. Well, if they're single, don't ask them why they're still single.
Yeah. Oh, geez. Could there be a more indicting question?
No, it's horrible. You're already like, well, thank you for revealing one of my deepest insecurities.
Do people ask that?
Oh, yeah. I write about one of the stories in my chapter on shame. I was on a date with the guy I was dating, and he took me to some of his closest friends to their house. They were married, they had a few kids, and the husband, looks at me, and right off the bat, one of the very first things, he's like, "Well, you seem nice,
Right.
you're, I was in my late 20s by this point." And he's like, "Why aren't you married yet?"
Right.
And I'm sitting here with his buddy, and I'm just like, I don't know. Like,
what am I supposed to say?
Yeah, what am I supposed to say that? Oh, yeah, all the time.
And what does that feel like? Give us the subtitle on that.
It feels like you're the kid who got picked last for the kickball team in fourth grade. You're just like
it's like he's almost saying, "Why do you suck?"
Yeah, why do you suck?
Are you crazy?
Yeah, you look fine, but there's got to be
what's
something
below the surface as to why? Wow.
Yeah. In fact, I just had a friend on a dating app recently, a guy that she was chatting with asked her that. I was just like, what? Like, this is nuts.
Yeah.
In fact, in the book, I've scattered throughout a few things, like I call them things you're too polite to say. They're just funny. They're just silly, but very hurtful.
Very practical.
Yeah, very practical.
To not do.
Don't do these things. In that chapter that you mentioned, the how to be a friend to someone with unmet longing, one of the there's a lot of like kind of fundamental lessons there. But one of the things that I feel like friendships, the pressure that we feel as a friend who's well-intentioned, we just don't want to see our friend hurting anymore, whether that's a peer or maybe it's a child, maybe it's a, a coworker, whoever it is. We want to we want to fix it. We want to make it feel better. And so one of the things I think we have to give ourselves the permission to not know what to say and to just be there.
Just be there.
Just be there. And to ask and even literally say the words like, your friends spilling their guts about the heartache they're carrying, and just be like, I don't know what to say, but I'm with you. And I hate that you're going through that. So give yourself permission to not have all the answers. And another great thing to ask and to say to a friend in this situation is to say, hey, tell me what it's like. Tell me, I've been married, whatever. I've been married 15 years. What's it like to date these days? Or tell me what it's like to be the only person at this baby shower who doesn't have a baby of their own. Tell me what that's like. And another great question to say is, teach me, or like, what do you need in this season? Like, how can I love you better? And teach me what it looks like. Right. So so many different things that I wish people had done for me, or that people did for me so well that I wanted to be like, this is it. This is what, how I would want everybody to be treated.
So good. I want to give you the last word on this. I saw this in the book when we first got it, Homesick for a Place You've Never Been. And it popped back up the other night. We were actually at a Bible study, and you mentioned this, and I had forgotten. And it's just so good. Homesick for a place you've never been. That phrasing, it really grabs the heart of what you went through, what we all go through, and what you're trying to help us as the reader learn how to navigate that.
Yeah.
Tell me about that. I believe words matter. Tell me about the origin of that sentence and what that really means, and you give it special treatment in the book.
Yeah.
Give us a bit of a preview of that.
Yes. Yeah. Homesick for a place I've never been. I think kind of even going back to that very first thing we talked about, the day after Christmas, and that weird mixture of joy and of heartache that's all coexisting. Homesick for a place I've never been is the feeling of like, I know there's more. The unmet longing that we experience attaches itself to things like a spouse, a child, a career, whatever it may be. But beneath all of that is we're longing for home. We're longing for a place to belong, a place of significance and of safety and of connection. And the best moments in life, you can picture your favorite place in the world with your favorite group of people. Maybe you're sitting around a fire smoking cigars. Yes. Maybe someone's playing a guitar. There's laughter. And that night's going to end. Yeah. It's going to come to a close. And so that's the reality of human life, is as long as we're on this earth, I believe that longing is one of the greatest evidences of God, that we were made, the way C.S. Lewis says, is I have evidence that I am made for a country that's not here. Yeah. And so that's what that chapter is about, is wrapping it all up and saying like, hey, I hope that God gives you your heart's desires in this life. But more than that, I hope that your faith is challenged and you are so deeply connected to him that you're able to zoom out and see the big picture. Because it's not just about this kind of narrow view of me getting what I want in this, 60, 70, 80, 90 years I have here. It's, do I see the bigger story that God is redeeming all of creation, that one day there will be no more unmet longing. And that's my hope for the book, is that people are able to have a faith that just gets 30,000 feet above the difficulty and the questions and the suffering. And that matters. It's not that it doesn't matter. Sure. But that we see even the best things in this life are not going to measure up to that eternity that's set in my heart, because I am made to belong and to live in a place in connection with God and with my fellow friends and with the new heavens and the new earth. Like, that ultimate hope is really where our longing will finally be met.
So good. You probably won't use this, but I'll close it anyway. She's Rachel Miller. The book is When It Hurts to Hope, Honest Conversations About Living with Unmet Longing. It's probably the universal pain. I don't care how specific you get with the types of pain, it all probably gets into the bucket of unmet longing. It's really important stuff, really good stuff. Thanks for sharing your story. It's going to help a lot of people.
Thank you, Ken.
You got it. All right. You guys are great. That is a wrap. Isn't she good?